When I started the excavation of Hobbs Barrow, I thought I knew exactly what kind of game this was going to be. A quiet village, a historical mystery, a slow, thoughtful point-and-click adventure. Nothing about it felt dangerous. In fact, it felt quaint, like the game wanted me to take my time, ask questions, and do the sensible thing. But a few hours in, the truth was revealed. I hadn't been uncovering a mystery, I'd been helping something dangerous. In its opening hours, the excavation of Hobbs Barrow presents itself as a traditional point-and-click adventure. You arrive with a clear role and reason for being there, and a task that feels professional rather than personal. There is nothing that screams urgency, and you're left to push forward at your own pace. The village of Bewley feels grounded and somewhat cooperative. Conversations are mostly polite and explanatory, maybe on the defensive side at times, but people generally answer your questions in a way that suggests there's nothing unusual about being asked them. When information is withheld, it doesn't feel evasive, but more like people wanting their privacy and keeping social boundaries in place. Structurally, the game moves slowly and deliberately. Locations are limited, movement is measured, and there's little pressure to optimize or rush. The stillness gives you space to observe, listen, and think things through without falling behind. Visually, the restrained pixel art and muted colour palette reinforce that calm and give an accurate representation of a sleepy village in the English countryside sitting under a grey blanket of clouds. There's no dramatic camera work or aggressive sound design demanding attention. Instead, the presentation feels content to sit quietly in the background, letting the player focus on conversations and small details. Taken together, it feels like the kind of game that rewards patience and careful observation. A story designed to be approached sensibly and taken seriously from the very beginning. And that's exactly the mindset this game wants you in when it finally hands you control. The excavation of Hobbs Barrow places you in the shoes of Thomasina Bateman, a barrow digger from London. A barrow digger is someone who excavates old burial grounds in search of artefacts and treasures. Thomasina has been invited to the village of Bewley by Leonard Shoulder to get more information on Hobbs Barrow for excavation, but the village itself has other ideas about how this introduction should go. Thomasina arrives in the newly built Bewley train station and is greeted by no one. Until an elderly lady walks past on the other side of the tracks and you have your first interaction with a local. While she rudely explains that where she is going is none of our business, she's very interested in the reason that we're here. We tell her the truth, and we soon get her opinion on what we do as a profession.
Hobbs Barrow? I can't say I've heard of it. For what reason?
I wish to excavate it.
Grave robber, are you?
I can't say she's entirely wrong in her assessment. It's an odd first impression, but the village doesn't dwell on it, and neither do we. We make our way along the cobbled wall into the village square where we can get our bearings. This is the main hub of Bewley, and you have a few options of where to go, though only one in this first instance. To the Plough and Furrow Inn. Here we meet our first true local to Bewley, and he sure has an interesting way of greeting us.
Please,
Yes.
give us a kiss now, won't you?
He must have thought we were French or something. We soon reject this man and send him home to his wife. I'm sure that won't be the last we see of him, but do we want to? I guess we should head inside the pub and try to settle in. Here we're greeted by the barkeep of the Plough and Furrow in a much warmer and more civilised fashion. He seems a lot more accepting of outsiders in the village than the rest of the locals. It's nice to feel welcomed and meet someone we could potentially lean on for help if it's needed in the future. Unfortunately, he tells us that the man we wish to meet, the reason we've travelled so long, is not here, but we can go up to our room and settle in. After such a long journey to get here, that sounds like a grand idea. We change out of our cumbersome dress and into some digs more suited to walking about and head downstairs again to wait for Leonard Shoulder. However, while we're waiting, we once again cross paths with the overly friendly chap we met outside, Arthur Tillett. He seems very apologetic and wishes to make good with us by providing us with answers to our questions the rest of the patrons seem to want no business with. It's becoming clear that we will be here for a while as Mr. Tillett needs a drink to loosen his lips some more. This seems like a bad idea to indulge what is clearly a problem, but we want to get excavating as soon as we can, so why the hell not?
Oh, what the hell were that for?
You passed out, Mr. Tillett.
Oh, sorry, lass. Where were I? Leonard's shoulder. Hold on another minute. I'm making for a piss.
This man is unbelievable.
Mr. Tillett starts to lose his faculties once more and excuses himself to the toilet. He's been gone an awfully long time. We better go check on him. If you've ever been in a pub toilet, you know what to expect. Is this where the horror begins? Mr. Tillett is nowhere to be found, and the door to the outside seems to be blocked. Let's go around and see what's blocking that door. A piece of wood is propped up against the door. It must have been Mr. Tillett, but what on earth spooked him enough to run off like that? There's a man outside the alley we could try to ask, but he starts to walk off rapidly. We try to follow him, but it's a fool's errand. We aren't going to wander off into the moors in the dark. Let's just head back to the inn and try to get some sleep. We can look for Mr. Tillett and Shoulder tomorrow. We know this is a horror game because the tags on Steam say so, but up to now the only horrors have been in that toilet in the pub. It's only the end of this prologue that we get an inkling that there is more than meets the eye with Bewley. Walking and talking have taken up most of our time so far, and that looks set to continue. While it's not the most intense or exciting set of actions, there's something calming about exploring an old English village where life moves at a noticeably slower rhythm. That slower pace gives you space to settle in, observe, and move through the world without pressure. Gradually, exploration becomes less about progress and more about understanding. By moving through the village, examining its spaces, and speaking to the people who live there, you learn how to navigate both the environment and its social boundaries. The game quietly teaches you that paying attention and taking the time to listen is how you're meant to engage with it. Long conversations add to this feeling of ease, with the locals, though somewhat closed off to an outsider, are willing to give you the time and answer your questions the best they can. That steady drip of information slowly edges you closer to your goal of excavating Hobbs Barrow, building anticipation without ever feeling forced. As a stranger in a new place, it feels completely natural to have the village folk explain things in detail. The game frames these exchanges as social courtesy rather than exposition, so nothing lands as a lore dump. Instead, it feels like you're being brought up to speed patiently and politely on how things work here. Puzzles in the excavation of Hobbs Barrow feel subtle and natural, much like the exploration and conversation that surround them. You're often blocked from getting things that move you closer to excavating the barrow, but not by abstract challenges or contrived logic that demand a Rube Goldberg way of thinking. Instead, the obstacles are grounded in reality and overcome through sensible procedural steps, asking the right person, waiting for permission, or carrying out a task that simply needs to be done. Progress comes not from cleverness, but from being willing to follow the process laid out in front of you. As we finish the prologue, we're treated to rotoscoped scenes that immediately evoke a sense of unease, like stepping briefly into the uncanny valley. Faces stretch and contort in ways that convey far more fear than their pixel counterparts ever could. These moments arrive unexpectedly, stopping us in our tracks just as we've settled into the comfort of the game's pixel-built world. When control is handed back to the player, that discomfort doesn't disappear. It lingers in subtler ways. There's a noticeable stillness to the world when moving through the village, where motion only occurs when it absolutely needs to.
The inn is closing soon, and no Mr. Shoulder. I should get some sleep and find him tomorrow.
That same restraint carries through to the music and sound design. The soundtrack is stripped back, creating an ethereal, almost dreamlike backdrop to exploration. This isn't a rip-roaring adventure in the vein of Indiana Jones. It's contained, cautious, and deliberately held back. By the time the game reaches its final day, very little has changed in how we approach it. We're still following the same routines, walking the village, seeking out the right people, trusting that patience and cooperation will eventually be rewarded with access to the Barrow. So far, that belief has held true. We've covered long distances, spoken to everyone who might help, and played by the village's rules without much reason to question them. There's a particular kind of dread that sets in when we realise that doing everything right hasn't led us to where we expected it to. The sense that something has slipped out of alignment, that the rules we've been following no longer protect us. The careful structure we trusted starts to wobble, and suddenly we're left questioning the weight of every choice we've made so far. In Hobbs Barrow, that unease doesn't last long before it turns into something heavier. There's the creeping understanding that we didn't stumble into this situation, we were guided here, step by step, by people who seemed trustworthy enough at the time. And while some mistakes can be corrected, this isn't one of them. The only option left is to continue forward, carrying the knowledge of how we got here. The realization settles in once we finally enter the Barrow. The walls around us narrow, funneling us into the only direction that still makes sense: forward. There's nothing physically stopping us from turning back, but we've already exhausted every option outside. Leaving now wouldn't be a choice, it would be abandoning the very reason we came to Bewley in the first place. Progress becomes less about permission and more about inevitability. Whatever waits in the dark below, we press on, not because we're forced to, but because it no longer feels possible to do anything else. Looking back, every moment of calm was a lesson in obedience. We only made it as far as we did because we followed the village's rules without question. We were polite, patient, and careful not to overstep. Nothing we did felt wrong, and that was the point. Our reward for doing everything correctly is horror. But the true horror doesn't come from the supernatural or the ancient god beneath the Barrow. It comes from a realization that control was never ours to begin with. We arrived in Bewley believing that we were pursuing our own goal, but progress was always granted to us in pieces. Answers were offered only when we had already proven we would accept them. Access wasn't denied, it was delayed, shaped and guided until the path forward felt earned rather than given. And even after that realization, we continue. Not because the game forces us to, but because obedience has already been framed as the correct way to exist in this world. Turning back would mean rejecting everything we've been taught to believe was reasonable. So we move forward, not as explorers anymore, but as participants.
I know what I need to do.
When the game ended, I expected to feel relief, but instead I felt both pity and betrayal. Betrayal from the lies and manipulation, not just from the villagers, but from the game itself. And pity for Thomasina, for what she endured in pursuit of a noble cause, and for how easily that pursuit was used against her. And those feelings followed me outside the game. I mean, just last week I found myself following instructions exactly as they were given, only to learn days later that those same instructions had caused real problems. The date was wrong, the guidance was flawed, but like Thomasina, I was still a participant, responsible for the outcome even if I wasn't responsible for the design. The Excavation of Hobbs Barrow doesn't just tell you a story about deception, it makes you experience it.
Oh, Mother, what have I done? Forgive me.
This is the kind of horror that I love. Not one built on reaction time or resource management, because I'm a wimp, but one built on a carefully crafted story. One that doesn't just happen to the character, but to you. Games like Hobbs Barrow are rare because they find a way to make being deceived feel meaningful. If you've also played the Excavation of Hobbs Barrow, then I'd really like to know how you felt about it, especially that ending. Did you get similar feelings to the ones I presented here, or did you take something completely different from the game? Please let me know in the comments down below. And this was my first time making a thoughtful analysis type video like this, so I would love to know how you thought I did by leaving a like or a dislike and subscribing for more to come. I have plenty of other videos on my channel, but I think you'll enjoy this video on screen the most. I will see you over there in a minute. Bye bye.